Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Stocker Team Special. Today, we are talking about a different kind of IPO. It is an African giant in the making, or an African giant that's going global. It is none other than OPay. OPay is a Nigerian fintech company that has now announced that it will be going on an IPO on the Nasdaq. So, for the first time, a Nigerian company will actually be listing on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. The first company that actually listed was Jumia, which listed on the New York Stock Exchange. So for the first time, we are having an actual Nigerian company that is going to be listed on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. So what exactly is OPay IPO all about? Is this just a bubble in the making? Is this IPO really worth it? Why is OPay going on an IPO not in Nigeria where its major business is? What exactly is the valuation? What exactly is the story? What exactly is OPay's business model? And is this something you should be looking at, maybe at the beginning of the IPO or after the IPO, after the lockup period? And of course, this episode and every episode we brought to you is brought to you by StockerTeam.com, the platform for retail investors to monitor the global financial markets in real time and actually keep in touch with their portfolio and get the best insight to actually become a very, very, very rounded investor. So let's jump right in. So OPay, one of Nigeria's biggest fintech, financial technology giant, is preparing for a Nasdaq IPO. They will be targeting a valuation of around $4 billion. Yes, you heard me right, which is quite a whole lot of story behind this. And there's also a whole lot of questions to be asked. Why is OPay listing or planning to list for the first time with a valuation of about $4 billion. But there's actually the real question. Is OPay actually worth that much? Or is this a fintech bubble in the making? Because, we've seen several fintech giants, on the US stock market listing for several high value, high flying valuation, and they crashed down to earth. We've seen Klarna IPO, which perhaps is one of the most disappointing IPO, and Klarna is more than 10 times bigger than OPay. But this is not just a negative approach to looking at OPay. We are actually going to be getting into the real meat. And if you've been watching this video and every video we've been doing, please give us a like. Also, put on the notification bell so that you don't miss any other updates. So, OPay really, according to this Bloomberg report, OPay has actually hired Citigroup, Deutsche Bank, JP Morgan Chase, very, very, very reputable, investment banking giants to actually package its IPO, which is going to be happening later this year. And just so that you actually know, OPay is backed by SoftBank Group. We know what SoftBank Group is all about. SoftBank Group was actually one of the earliest investors in Nvidia, although they sold their stake maybe too early, and Nvidia is the biggest company by market cap today. SoftBank is also one of the earliest investors in Alibaba, which actually made them a whole lot of money. SoftBank also invested in ARM or Ham Holdings, which is the UK chip design company. So it's a very, very, very quite reputable investor backing OPay since early before the COVID period when they actually launched in Nigeria. So, like I said, it's a globally backed fintech player. Apart from SoftBank Vision Fund, Opera Software, which is also listed, on the US stock market in Nasdaq for, as a matter of fact, was actually the earlier incubator for OPay. They also had some institutional backers, which actually gave them some rounds. In 2021, SoftBank actually invested one of the biggest funding round for OPay at about $400 million dollars was raised, and OPay at that time was valued at about $2 billion dollars. So between 2021 and now, what has really changed? OPay has now doubled its valuation according to the preliminary information that we're getting from the IPO. And if you look at the business structure of OPay, what has OPay really achieved? The $4 billion valuation target is not necessarily out of place. At least we've seen bigger fintech listing or actually going to the market with bigger valuation. But let's look at the numbers. Sometimes the devil might actually be in the detail, and the detail might actually tell a more positive story. So OPay has over 50 million users till date. Out of the 50 million, about 10 million of those are actually daily active users. So it's actually really a heavy platform, fintech platform. They also estimated, according to some of the information that we've gathered, they have about 12 billion in monthly transaction. $12 billion in monthly transaction, according to some of the disclosures that we've seen. The company also has a major, or if not the most significant, share of the mobile wallet market in Nigeria. So in the real sense, OPay has actually become perhaps one of the most significant financial infrastructure player or layer in the Nigerian banking or financial services sector. So what exactly is the business model? On Stock Team, we don't necessarily just focus too much on the high-flying numbers: 50 million users, 10 million active daily users, and close to about $12 billion monthly transaction volume. We actually want to look at how does this company actually make money? What is the business model that differentiates OPay from the likes of MoneyPoint, the likes of Kuda Bank, and some other fintech that actually are making waves in Nigeria. So number one, they actually make money using the super app fintech model, which is quite very popular in China. So in China, you have mega fintech super apps, which OPay perhaps brought that kind of business model into Nigeria. So they make money from transaction fees, so payment, transfers. OPay in Nigeria, to an extent, is known as one of the fastest, if not the fastest, way to actually send money to anyone within Nigeria just with a mobile number. So the payments and the transfers they actually do, they actually get micro amount, which actually adds up to the volume. They also have a very strong agent banking network, POS terminals, payment terminals that they actually spread across the Nigerian ecosystem. So a whole lot of reform has happened in the last 6 to 7 years in the Nigerian banking sector, and so agent banking has been carved out for players like OPay to actually play very big, to actually take banking to different part of the country, different part of communities, very remote communities where they might not necessarily have access to core banking services. So OPay really has filled in the gap alongside other fintech in the market. So they make money from these merchant transactions. You could also see that they also have microloans. They have lending products. So over 50 million users or customers, and also close to about 10 million daily active users. That's actually huge for them to monetize. So the micro lending business, which they have a microfinance license. I'm also not too sure why OPay hasn't applied for maybe a regional banking license to actually make them maybe provide bigger lending services, but it's still yet to be seen. So they also have a whole lot of merchant services and payment infrastructure that they actually offer to small businesses. So the key advantage for OPay is the high frequency, the low value volume transaction that actually run into millions or even several millions in hours or even within a few minutes down the line, and that huge transaction volume actually drives that strong network effect that they benefit, that massive data advantage, because the app is quite sticky and quite easier to actually use compared to even some of the most established banks, like even the GTCO app. So they also have that sticky customer base, like I said. So, but the company is not necessarily free from some of a few concerns or challenges here and there. And as a value or fundamental investor, you actually want to make sure you're not just looking at the company as a fintech. You are actually looking at the business model of this company. Is this really actually going to move the needle for OPay? Some of the risks that we have actually seen, the Nigerian banking sector is going through a lot of reforms, and I will continue to go through a lot of reforms. So there's maybe some banana peel, if you may say. If you look at regulatory risk, 2024 they had some scrutiny that the central bank actually had to stop them from onboarding new customers. So the fraud, trust issues that might happen on the platform, and they actually have to refund. A whole lot of operational inefficiencies that could actually even put them in so much more trouble. So as an investor, you actually need to pay attention to some of these points. You also have to look at the team margin. So OPay actually puts most of his unique selling point or proposition to the very, very cheap or easiest and the most affordable way to actually send and receive money. So at the end of the day, you don't necessarily know how much a company actually makes, even with the huge $12 billion daily volume of transactions. So what percentage does OPay actually records as its actual revenue, and what percentage of that revenue actually becomes profit? Is OPay actually even profitable in the first place? So all of these questions actually still need to be asked. So competition, like I said, PalmPay, which is also Chinese origin, PalmPay, they've also been in the market, and they are not necessarily as aggressive in terms of marketing as OPay, but it actually also became much more stronger down the line. MoneyPoint, which is also quite big, we don't necessarily know if MoneyPoint will not also go on IPO in the next couple of months or quarters down the line. And we have the typical traditional banks like GTCO, which is one of the most successful banks. Giant GTCO is perhaps the most valuable company or bank really in Nigeria, almost neck and neck with Zenith. So GTCO really, they built the business around their digital proposition. So OPay being valued at about $4 billion when GT is just less than $2 billion. That raised maybe a whole lot of red flags, maybe a whole lot of questions that if GT has several billions of dollars in assets and they are just worth about, less than $3 billion, and OPay, we haven't actually seen their balance sheet. What is the asset base? What is actually the customer funds that they actually hold within their super wallet? And what is actually the revenue? What is actually, even the free cash flow that OPay has? So all of these questions are still very, 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 very strong for anyone to answer. So, and why exactly, why is OPay actually trying to list in the US stock market? You could actually ask this question, and this is a very, very valid question. So, number one, if you list in the US market, you get a higher valuation. Maybe that's why the $4 billion might not necessarily be a huge stretch, because if they go to the US market and they are listing maybe for about $1.5 billion, they might actually look too small, and investors might not necessarily pay attention to them. But that doesn't necessarily mean you actually have to inflate your valuation to be taken seriously. So it's like a chicken and an egg thing. So also they will actually get higher access to capital. So if OPay is listed on the Nasdaq, they will actually get more bid for their stock, deeper liquidity, investors who have actually invested in OPay since the beginning of the company will actually also be able to, offload some of those shares, and that's the downside for retail investors who actually want to get involved, in this IPO down the line. So also, credibility, visibility, US IPOs actually makes OPay to say we are a global fintech, and maybe they also want to go global, maybe to other regions within sub-Saharan Africa, and that gives them that image. However, the devil is still in the detail rather. So, the valuation $4 billion, is this really fair? Or it's just a proposition that will actually fall like a pack of cards? The US stock market is the most dynamic and perhaps the most scrutinized in the world. So the current implied valuation that was actually disclosed by Opera, which is the Opera, one of the biggest investors in OPay, it's about $3.1 billion. So Opera's stake in the business, in Opera's financial report, says Opera has $3 billion worth of asset or worth of valuation for OPay, and the IPO says they are going for about $4 billion. So we are looking at about 30% premium for OPay to actually list on the stock market, on the Nasdaq. So is this really fair? Is this really realistic? Like I said, the likes of GTCO is less than $3 billion. Zenith is also less than $4 billion, or even far less in terms of valuation. Access Bank is also far less than that. So, and these are giant banks in the Nigerian, in the West Africa, and even Africa. They generate billions of dollars in profit annually, and they have decades of stability. They actually now trade at relatively modest valuation due to the macro risk in Nigeria. So there's a whole lot of risk in investing in Nigeria, although those risks are actually now being discounted with a whole lot of reforms that's happened in the market, in the Nigerian market, for that matter, the FX policy, the removal of subsidy, and also a whole lot of liberalization that's happened. So the Nigerian stock market is actually getting more bidding, and the market makers, the market regulators even had to extend the trading period on the Nigerian stock exchange from 9:30 to 2:30 now to actually to 4 p.m. to actually allow global investors to have access to the market. You've also seen the Russell, they've actually we added Nigeria market and Nigerian equities to the emerging market index. So there's a whole lot of positivity coming into the likes of GT, Zenith. GT has almost doubled its valuation in the last 3 years. Zenith almost the same thing. So what exactly is OPay looking to do with this valuation? Is this just an exit strategy for early investors in OPay? SoftBank Vision Fund, Opera themselves, are they necessarily why is Opera listing OPay separately, and why not just acquire OPay fully and operate under the Opera umbrella? So what's OPay selling? We haven't seen the profit. We don't know whether the business is profitable, but what we can see is they will be pushing the growth numbers. They will also push the ambition for market dominance and that monetization opportunities that they have. So is this valuation justified? Is this really something that investors should actually not worry about, or is it, based on what I've actually analyzed, has this actually brought out much more alarm bells in your head? So let's look at it this way: the bull case, why the 4 billion might make sense. They have that massive user base, 50 million users, and 10 million of them actually are active in a day, about $12 billion in daily volume transaction, according to some of the disclosures. The high transaction volume, financial inclusion, because Nigeria is actually one of the success story of agent banking, POS terminals actually taking banking services to rural and remote areas. So, and their potential to expand beyond Nigeria. So Nigeria has one of the fastest growing diasporan population across the world, and in a whole year they could actually be moving more than 30 to 40 billion dollars into the Nigerian economy. So is OPay looking to cash in on this? We've seen several fintech building their business around the Nigerian diaspora abroad because of the value and volume of transactions. So is OPay also maybe looking to compete with the likes of Lemfi, who actually are getting much more customers, Nigerian diaspora, sending money through them. So, but the bear case is also very strong. So, irrespective of what OPay has achieved, it's still not necessarily all well and dandy. So, the low margin in payment in fintech sometimes is actually more or less a race to the bottom. So, they have the largest and some of the biggest banks in Africa to contend with, the GT code, the Zenith, the Access, and so their margin could be very, very thin. They also have core fintech like MoneyPoint, like PalmPay and Kuda. Many of these banks or fintech rather, they are actually still competing with OPay. So regulatory unpredictability. If OPay doesn't have very, very strong controls, compliance, KYC, they could actually get some blow from the regulator. Profitability, we don't necessarily know if OPay is profitable. We don't even know behind the hood what's going on. And every reliance on the Nigerian market maybe could be something to worry about, but not much per se. So our final verdict, and before I do that, if you've been watching, please give this video a like, subscribe to our channel, put on that notification bell so that you don't miss the next IPO or opportunity that we'll be bringing to you. So, our own verdict, not necessarily the judgment in the law court. What we actually think is the conservative valuation. If you really, really want to skin the goat or skin this big cat, you could actually be looking at $2.5 billion to maybe roughly near $3 billion if you want to actually have a more fair valuation, maybe about 3 to 3.5 billion. But if you actually want to follow the hype, you might actually say, okay, maybe $4 billion is the hype region. But actually, we don't necessarily know what is going on with the business. When we see the prospectus, the filings, then we could actually have an idea, and that might actually bring out a whole lot of positive. It could actually even make it more worse or more concerning for would-be investors and the market in general. So the pricing is perhaps aggressive. It's not necessarily rational. It's actually betting on the future expansion of OPay, monetization, and maybe an opportunity to dominate the fintech. So OPay is not necessarily just a fintech. It's a bet on the African financial future. The story sounds one of the most strongest story that actually came out, success story out of the African or the Nigerian market. Is OPay able to deliver? It's yet to be seen. But at the end of the day, is 4 billion justified or overvalued? We're actually going to see as soon as OPay actually goes live on the Nasdaq market, on the Nasdaq Stock Exchange. So like I said, this episode has been brought to you by StockAtim.com, the platform for retail investors to get coaching, guidance, and also monitor the global financial market in real time and get the intelligence. So we've just launched StockAtim.com, the new gateway platform, and it's really, really making news everywhere. StockAtim.com gateway is now available for anyone, anywhere who want to actually monitor the global financial market. It's totally free to use. There's no cost to you. We are rolling out the premium features very soon, but as of now, just log in for the first time if you already have your gateway ID, or just put your email into the sign-in process, and actually you'll be able to get your gateway ID, and you can get access to some of the best intelligence. You can actually monitor the global market. You can track just about anything, the US dollar, maybe the US dollar to euro in real time. You can monitor even the Naira. Yeah, you can monitor the global market, any stock of your choice. Let's just check Microsoft. You can go for Microsoft, which is MSFT, if you know the ticker. And you should be able to actually have access to the global market, have access to all the information you need. And as an investor, you actually want to be in the know. You actually want to make sure the news moving the market is not outside of your reach. So StockTeam.com or StockTeam Gateway is actually the place to be, and we'll be rolling out more features as it goes. So that's all we have for this episode. Please keep investing, keep growing, and we will be looking forward to OPay's IPO. Go to StockTeam.com today and get your gateway ID to get access to the platform. Take care. Bye bye.